The courtroom smelled of old wood and broken promises. Outside, Lagos traffic hummed its eternal song of horns and exhaust. But inside Judge Adebayo's chambers, silence stretched like a held breath. The only sounds were the scratch of expensive pens on legal papers and the soft whir of an ancient ceiling fan that had witnessed 1,000 endings. Abeni sat perfectly still in the wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap like a prayer she'd forgotten how to finish. Across the mahogany table, Musa leaned back in his leather chair, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His designer shirt was crisp despite the Lagos heat. His gold watch caught the fluorescent light like a beacon of his success. He was enjoying this. The realization hit her with startling clarity as she watched him review the divorce papers. This wasn't painful for him. This wasn't the end of dreams or the burial of love. This was liberation. His freedom papers, his get-out-of-jail-free card from a marriage he'd apparently outgrown. Finally, Musa said, his voice carrying that particular tone of a man who'd just solved an irritating problem. He picked up the expensive Mont Blanc pen, a gift she'd saved 3 months to buy him for their second anniversary, back when his success was still their success. He twirled it between his fingers like a conductor preparing for his final symphony. Judge Adebayo cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Mwenda, if you're ready to proceed with the signatures." "Oh, I'm ready." Musa's smile was wide, genuine, the kind of smile he used to save for their wedding photos. "I've been ready for months." The words landed on Abeni's chest like stones. Not because they hurt, she was beyond hurt now, but because they confirmed what she'd known in the deepest, quietest part of her heart. While she'd been fighting to save their marriage, he'd been planning its funeral. Abeni watched him sign his name with a flourish that seemed almost celebratory. Each letter of Musa Mwenda flowed across the page with the confidence of a man who believed he was signing up for a better life, not signing away the woman who'd built his current one. "There," he said, setting the pen down with a soft click that echoed in the small room, finally free from dead weight. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Dead weight. That's what 6 years of marriage had meant to him. That's what her love, her sacrifice, her silent support through every struggle had amounted to in his mental accounting. Abeni's hands remained perfectly still in her lap, but something inside her chest shifted, not breaking, but crystallizing, like water becoming ice, like pressure becoming diamond. She had given him everything, her dreams, her time, her identity, her body, her soul. She had molded herself into whatever shape he needed. Supportive wife during his failures, gracious hostess for his success, invisible woman when he needed space, cheerleader when he needed confidence. She had been his foundation, his safety net, his biggest believer. And he called it dead weight. Judge Adebayo reached for the papers, his movements careful and practiced. This was just another Tuesday for him, another couple dissolving what they'd once promised would last forever. "Mrs. Mwenda, your signature here, please." Abeni took the pen, the same pen Musa had used to sign away their life together, and felt its weight in her fingers. Strange how something so small could carry so much finality. She signed her name slowly, each letter deliberate. Not because she was hesitating, but because she wanted to remember this moment. The moment she stopped being half of someone else and became whole in herself. As her signature completed the legal dissolution of their marriage, Musa actually chuckled. A low, satisfied sound that suggested he was already mentally planning his new life, his better life, his life without the burden of a wife who apparently couldn't keep up with his elevation. Judge Adebayo gathered the papers with efficient movements. "Very well. The dissolution is complete. However," he paused, squinting at a document that had been paper-clipped to the back of the divorce decree. "There appears to be one more financial disclosure that needs to be read into the record." Musa's expression flickered, just for a moment, with mild irritation. He was probably thinking about the lunch meeting he had scheduled, or the evening with whatever woman had helped him realize that Abeni was dead weight. "What financial disclosure?" he asked, his tone suggesting this was an unnecessary delay to his celebration. "Assets and business ownership declarations," Judge Adebayo replied, adjusting his reading glasses. "Standard procedure." Mrs. Mwenda's legal counsel submitted additional documentation this morning. Abeni watched Musa's face carefully. The confusion was genuine. In all their years together, through all their conversations about money and future and dreams, he had never once asked her what she did during those long hours when he was building his empire. He had never inquired about the small amounts of money she set aside each month, never wondered why she spent so much time on her laptop late at night, never questioned the packages that arrived addressed to her or the phone calls she took in hushed tones. He had been too busy becoming successful to notice that she might be becoming something too. "Just read it," Musa said, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's get this over with." Judge Adebayo cleared his throat and began to read from the document. Business registration and ownership declaration for ABN Studios, a fashion design and manufacturing company incorporated in Lagos State 3 years ago. The words floated in the air like a revelation waiting to land. Abeni felt the familiar flutter in her stomach, the same feeling she'd had when she sold her first dress, when she received her first bulk order, when she realized that the small thing she'd built in secret had grown into something larger than she'd ever imagined. Annual gross revenue for the past fiscal year. Judge Adebayo continued, his voice steady and professional. 12.8 million naira, with projected revenue growth of 40% for the coming year. Musa's pen, which he'd been absently clicking in his hand, went still. Partnership agreements with 3 major fashion retailers in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. Export contracts with clients in Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Current business valuation assessed at 18.6 million naira. The room went very quiet. Even the ancient ceiling fan seemed to pause its lazy rotation. Musa's head turned slowly toward Abeni, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the first stirring of a very uncomfortable realization. "ABN Studios," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "ABN." Abeni met his gaze for the first time since they'd entered the courtroom. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm as morning water. "My initials. Abeni, Beatrice and Kem. My grandmother's name was Beatrice. I thought you might have asked about that by now." "You—" He started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "You own a company?" "I own a company." "An 18 million naira company?" "Apparently." The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. This wasn't the silence of a woman who had nothing to say. This was the silence of a woman who had been saying everything, all along, in a language he'd never bothered to learn. Musa's face had gone pale beneath his expensive cologne and carefully maintained appearance. "How? When did you—" "While you were becoming too important to notice me," Abeni said quietly. "I was remembering who I was before I became invisible." Judge Adebayo, who had presided over hundreds of divorce proceedings but had rarely seen such a dramatic reversal of fortunes, continued reading. The business assets include proprietary designs, established supply chains, registered trademarks, and a growing online presence with over 200,000 followers across social media platforms. 200,000 followers? Musa's voice cracked slightly. Abeni's smile was small, private, and devastating in its quietness. "They know me as ABN. They don't know me as your wife." That turned out to be an advantage. For the first time in months, maybe years, Musa was looking at her. Really looking. Not through her or around her or past her to something more interesting, but directly at her, as if seeing her for the first time. And what he saw, reflected in her calm, dark eyes, was the uncomfortable truth that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had just signed divorce papers that released his claim to a woman who had quietly built something extraordinary, while he'd been too busy building his own ego to notice her building an empire. The settlement, Judge Adebayo concluded, indicates that Mrs. Mwenda is claiming no financial support or division of marital assets, as her independent business interests provide sufficient income for her post-divorce life. Musa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Abeni stood slowly, smoothing down her simple dress. Not designer, not expensive, but elegant in its understated confidence. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, inclining her head respectfully toward Judge Adebayo. Then she turned toward the door, walking with the quiet dignity of a woman who had just discovered she didn't need anyone's permission to be powerful. Behind her, she heard Musa's voice, strangled and desperate. "Abeni, wait!" She paused at the door, her hand on the handle, but didn't turn around. "When?" he asked, and she could hear the wheels of his mind spinning frantically, trying to piece together how he'd missed something so enormous happening right under his nose. "When did you build all of this?" Abeni's voice, when she answered, carried the weight of every night she'd stayed up sketching while he slept. Every early morning she'd packed orders while he got ready for work. Every phone call she'd taken in whispers while he watched television, oblivious to the empire she was building in the spaces between his attention. "While you were deciding I was dead weight," she said softly, "I was proving I was a diamond you were too blind to see." She opened the door and stepped into the corridor, leaving behind the man who thought he'd ended their story by signing his name. What he didn't know, what he was only beginning to understand as he sat alone in that small room with the echo of her words and the devastating revelation of everything he'd lost, was that he hadn't ended anything. He had only signed his exit from the most remarkable story she was just beginning to write. 6 years earlier, the first time Abeni saw Musa, he was arguing with a photocopying machine in the university library. His engineering textbooks were scattered across a table like the remnants of a battle he was losing. It was 2 a.m., the library was nearly empty, and she should have been in her dormitory preparing for her final fashion design presentation, but something about his frustrated muttering made her smile. "Try hitting the reset button," she whispered, approaching his table with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent countless late nights wrestling with temperamental equipment in the design studio. He looked up, and she saw exhaustion mixed with determination in his dark eyes. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and there were pencil marks on his fingers from hours of calculations. He looked like ambition wearing human skin. "I've tried everything," he said, gesturing helplessly at the machine. "I need these printed by morning for my project presentation. If I don't pass this course—" "You won't graduate," she finished. "I know the feeling." She moved to the photocopier, pressed a sequence of buttons she'd learned through trial and error during her own desperate late-night printing sessions, and the machine hummed to life with cooperative efficiency. "How did you—" Musa stared at the machine as if she'd performed magic. "I speak frustrated student trying to graduate," Abeni said with a small laugh. "Fluently." That was the beginning. Their courtship unfolded in the margins of their final university year. Stolen conversations between classes, shared meals of bread and instant noodles when money was tight, long walks across campus where they painted dreams across the Lagos skyline visible in the distance. Musa talked about the tech company he wanted to start, the apps he would create, the way he would revolutionize how people connected with local services. His eyes lit up when he spoke about his future, and Abeni found herself falling in love not just with him, but with his vision of possibility. She told him about her own dreams too, the fashion line she wanted to launch, the way she envisioned blending traditional African prints with contemporary cuts, creating clothes that celebrated heritage while embracing modernity. She showed him her sketchbooks, pages filled with designs that seemed to dance off the paper with color and movement. "You're going to be famous," he said one evening as they sat on the steps of the design building, her portfolio spread between them like a roadmap to her future. "These are incredible, Abeni. The world needs to see this." "We're both going to be famous," she corrected, leaning against his shoulder. "We'll build our empires side by side." The plan was simple, beautiful in its symmetry. They would graduate, get married, and chase their dreams together. Two ambitious young people who believed love and hard work could overcome anything Lagos threw at them. But dreams, Abeni would learn, are fragile things. They require more than love to survive. They require space to breathe, resources to grow, and, most importantly, someone who still believes in them when the world starts to press down with its weight. 3 months after graduation, Musa's tech startup was struggling. The app he'd spent 2 years developing had gained only a few hundred users, nowhere near the thousands he'd projected. His savings, never substantial to begin with, had evaporated on hosting fees, marketing attempts, and the basic cost of living in Lagos. Abeni found him one evening sitting on the floor of their tiny one-bedroom apartment in Yaba. his laptop balanced on his knees, staring at user statistics that told a story of dreams deferred. "Maybe I should get a regular job," he said quietly, not looking up from the screen. "Something stable. Stop chasing fantasies." "Don't you dare," Abeni said, settling beside him on the floor. "This is just the beginning. Every successful person has this moment, the moment they decide whether to quit or push through." "But we need money, Abeni, real money. You can't eat app downloads." She looked around their small apartment, at the second-hand furniture they'd bought with pooled resources, at the stack of job rejection letters on the table, at the dress she'd been working on hanging from a door frame, unfinished because her sewing machine had broken and they couldn't afford to repair it. "What if I get a job?" she said suddenly. "Something stable, with a good salary, just temporarily, until your app takes off." "What about your fashion line?" "It can wait," she said, and even as the words left her mouth, she felt something small and precious curl up inside her chest. Dreams don't have expiration dates, but rent does. That was the first time Abeni folded her dreams to make room for his. It wouldn't be the last. She found work at a bank, good salary, steady hours, professional environment, the kind of job her mother had always hoped she'd take, the kind that offered security and respectability. She was grateful for it, truly, but every morning as she put on her conservative suits and headed to the financial district, she felt a little more distant from the vibrant, creative woman she'd been in university. "This is temporary," she reminded herself daily, watching Lagos rush past through the bus window as she commuted to work. "Just until Musa gets established." And Musa was grateful. He said so every day, sometimes multiple times. He thanked her for believing in him, for supporting them, for giving him the space to focus on building something extraordinary. In the evenings, when she came home tired from processing loan applications and customer complaints, he would show her his latest app improvements, his growing user base, his plans for expansion. "Look," he'd say, pulling her onto his lap in front of his laptop screen, "we gained 50 new users today. That's more than we've ever had in a single day." And Abeni would smile and congratulate him and ask thoughtful questions about user engagement and retention rates, even though part of her wondered when he would ask about her day, her dreams, her own plans for the future that seemed to be getting smaller and smaller to accommodate his growing larger and larger. The apartment changed as Musa's app gained traction. Better furniture replaced their second-hand pieces. A larger television, a newer laptop, improved internet connection. Small luxuries that marked their progress from struggling graduates to a couple with prospects. But Abeni's sewing machine remained broken in the corner, covered by a sheet that had somehow become permanent. Like a shroud over the part of herself she'd promised was only temporarily buried. Soon, she told herself when she looked at it, when things settle down, when Musa's business is stable, when we have more space, more time, more money. Always when. Never now. 18 months after graduation, Musa's app was featured in a local tech magazine as one of Lagos's most promising startups. The article included a photo of Musa standing in their living room, his laptop open on the table, looking every inch the young entrepreneur on the rise. Abeni wasn't in the photo. She'd been at work when the photographer came. That night, they celebrated at a restaurant that would have been impossibly expensive when they first moved in together. Musa ordered wine and talked excitedly about the interview requests he'd been receiving, the potential investors who had reached out, the doors that were opening. "This is it, baby," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for. Everything you've sacrificed, everything you've given up. It's about to pay off." Abeni smiled and squeezed his hand and said all the right supportive things. But underneath the celebration, underneath her genuine happiness for his success, was a question she couldn't quite silence. When would it be her turn? 2 years. That's how long it took for Musa's app to go from promising startup to genuinely successful business. 2 years of Abeni working at the bank, managing their household, being the stable foundation that allowed him to take risks and chase opportunities. 2 years of her dreams sitting in a corner, collecting dust. By then, their lives had taken on a rhythm that felt permanent. Musa worked from home, taking meetings with investors and partners, traveling to conferences and networking events. Abeni went to the bank, came home, cooked dinner, listened to his stories about his day, and helped him think through business challenges. She had become the supporting character in the story of his success. And perhaps most painfully, she had become so good at it that everyone, including Musa, had forgotten she'd ever wanted to be anything else. "You're so lucky," her friend Kemi said one evening when they met for drinks after work. "Musa is doing so well, and you have such a stable job. You two are like the perfect power couple." "Power couple," Abeni repeated, turning the phrase over in her mind like an uncomfortable shoe. "I suppose we are. I mean, some women chase these impossible dreams, trying to start businesses, thinking they're going to be the next big thing. But you're smart. You chose security. You chose to support your husband's vision instead of chasing fantasies." Abeni nodded and smiled and agreed that yes, she was very practical, very smart, very supportive. And she went home that night and stood for a long time in front of her covered sewing machine, wondering when practicality had become another word for disappearing. The night everything shifted was unremarkable in its beginning. Musa was working late again, preparing for a presentation to potential international partners. Abeni had finished cleaning up from dinner and was settling in to watch television when her phone buzzed with a message from Kemi. "Girl, you have to see this." Attached was a link to an Instagram page, a young woman in Accra who was selling African-inspired jewelry online. Her pieces were beautiful, original, and according to the comments, selling faster than she could make them. She started this 6 months ago from her bedroom. Kemi's next message read, 6 months, and look at her following. She's about to quit her day job. Abeni scrolled through the woman's feed, seeing not just jewelry but joy. Photos of the creative process, of satisfied customers, of a young woman building something with her own hands that brought beauty into the world. The captions were filled with gratitude and excitement and the unmistakable energy of someone living their purpose. She closed the app and sat in the quiet of their living room, listening to the sound of Musa's fingers on his keyboard in the next room, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not break, crack open, like a seed that had been waiting in winter soil for the first hint of spring. That night, after Musa had finally come to bed and fallen asleep beside her, Abeni got up quietly and pulled the sheet off her sewing machine. She plugged it in, held her breath, and pressed the power button. It hummed to life as if it had been waiting for her. She opened her old sketchbooks and found designs she'd forgotten she'd created, pages and pages of ideas that were just as fresh and exciting as the day she'd drawn them. Maybe more so, because now she had the perspective of someone who understood the world differently, who knew what women really needed in their wardrobes, who had learned to see beauty in practical things. By dawn, she had sewn her first piece in 3 years, a simple wrap dress that somehow contained all of her accumulated skill, longing, and quiet determination. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. It was proof that the part of herself she'd folded away was still there, still breathing, still creating, still alive. When Musa found her in the living room the next morning, surrounded by fabric and thread, he looked genuinely confused. "What's all this?" he asked, stepping carefully around the materials scattered on the floor. "I'm making something," Abeni said simply. "For what?" She looked up at him. This man she loved. This man whose dreams she'd supported so completely that she'd forgotten she had her own, and realized he genuinely didn't understand what he was seeing. "For me," she said quietly. And in that moment, in the soft morning light of their living room, with her hands covered in thread and her heart full of possibility she'd almost forgotten existed, Abeni began the long journey back to herself. She just didn't know yet that she would have to make that journey alone. The first dress sold for 3,000 naira. Abeni stared at the notification on her phone. A stranger named Funmi from Abuja had just transferred money for the wrap dress she'd posted on Instagram 3 days earlier. 3,000 naira. Not enough to change her life, but enough to prove that someone, somewhere, valued what she created. "What are you smiling about?" Musa asked from across their breakfast table, not looking up from his own phone where he was scrolling through tech news and startup blogs. "Just a funny message from Kemi," Abeni lied smoothly, closing her phone and returning to her toast. The lie tasted bitter, but she wasn't ready to explain. Wasn't ready for his questions, his practical concerns. His well-meaning suggestions about how she should focus on her stable job instead of chasing side projects. The dress was already packaged and sitting by the door, waiting for the courier she'd arranged to pick it up on her way to work. 3,000 naira minus shipping costs, minus the cost of materials, left her with maybe 1,500 naira profit. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the message Funmi had sent with her order. "I saw this dress and I knew I had to have it. It's exactly what I've been looking for, but could never find in stores. You're so talented." Talented. Someone thought she was talented. For 3 years, the only feedback she'd received about her abilities came in the form of performance reviews at the bank, where words like reliable and consistent were considered praise. But talented, creative, extraordinary? Those words had been locked away so long she'd almost forgotten they existed. "I should get going," Musa said, standing and gathering his laptop and papers. "Big meeting today with potential investors from South Africa. Could be the expansion opportunity we've been waiting for." "That's wonderful," Abeni said, and meant it. His success still mattered to her, still felt like something they shared, even as her own secret project grew quietly in the shadows of their life together. After he left, she sat in the kitchen for a few extra minutes, savoring the morning light and the feeling of possibility that had become her secret companion. In a few hours, a woman in Abuja would unwrap her creation and hopefully feel beautiful wearing it. The thought sent warmth through her chest, like the first sip of perfectly brewed tea. At work that day, between processing loan applications and answering customer inquiries, Abeni found herself sketching in the margins of her notepad. Quick lines that became skirt shapes, sleeve details, neckline variations. Ideas that seemed to flow from her fingers without conscious direction. "You're artistic," observed Mrs. Okafor, her colleague who sat at the adjacent desk. She was peering over Abeni's shoulder during their lunch break, studying the small drawings scattered across her papers. "Oh, these are just doodles," Abeni said quickly, moving to cover the sketches with other documents. "No, really, these are good. My daughter is always complaining that she can't find clothes that fit properly or look modern but still respectful for church. You should design something for young women like her." The suggestion planted itself in Abeni's mind like a seed in fertile soil. Young women who wanted to look modern but respectful. Professional but feminine. Stylish but accessible. She thought about the women she saw every day on the bus to work, in the bank, on the streets of Lagos. Women navigating the complex expectations of family, career, tradition, and personal expression. What if she could create clothes that helped them do that navigation with confidence? That evening, while Musa worked late on his investor presentation, Abeni spread fabric across their living room floor like a cartographer mapping new territory. She had purchased the materials during her lunch break, simple cotton in deep blue, a color that would complement most skin tones, professional enough for work but soft enough for weekend wear. She was cutting pattern pieces when her phone buzzed with a message from Funmi. "The dress is perfect. Do you have anything similar in green? My sister wants one too." Abeni's hand stilled on the fabric scissors. A second customer, a referral, the beginning of something that might actually be called a business. She worked until 2 a.m. that night, her movements careful and deliberate in the quiet apartment. The sewing machine hummed softly, a sound she muffled with towels so it wouldn't wake Musa. By dawn, she had completed 2 pieces, a sleeveless blouse that could be dressed up or down, and a midi skirt with subtle pleating that would flatter most body types. She photographed them as the morning light streamed through their living room windows, using techniques she'd learned from watching YouTube tutorials during her lunch breaks. Natural lighting, multiple angles, styling with accessories she borrowed from her own wardrobe. Before leaving for work, she posted the photos on Instagram with a simple caption, "New pieces available, DM for details." By the time she reached the bank, both items had sold. The pattern continued for weeks. Work during the day, sewing late into the night, early morning photography sessions before Musa woke up. Abeni developed a rhythm that felt like living a double life. Banker by day, designer by night, with only the growing number of Instagram followers and the increasing frequency of order notifications as proof that the second life was real. She opened a separate bank account for her earnings, something she told herself was just good business practice, but felt like something deeper. A life vest she was weaving for herself, thread by thread, sail by sail. "You've been tired lately," Musa observed one evening, noticing the dark circles under her eyes. "Maybe you should take some time off work. You've been so stressed." "I'm fine," Abeni assured him, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She was tired, yes, but it was a different kind of tiredness than she'd felt before. This was the exhaustion of someone building something, not just maintaining something. It felt purposeful, earned, alive. "Maybe we should take a vacation," he suggested. "Go somewhere relaxing, Zanzibar maybe, or Cape Town. I can afford it now." The offer was generous, loving even. 6 months ago, she would have been thrilled at the prospect of traveling together, exploring new places, making memories. But now, the thought of taking time away from her work, because that's what it was now, work, felt impossible. "Let's wait until your South African deal closes," she said. "I don't want to distract you from something so important." He smiled and kissed her forehead, appreciating what he interpreted as her continued support for his ambitions. He didn't notice that she was protecting her own. 3 months into her secret business, Abeni faced her first real crisis. A customer named Bisi had ordered a dress for her daughter's graduation ceremony, something special that needed to be completed in 5 days. The timeline was tight but manageable, until Abeni's sewing machine broke down completely, refusing to respond to any amount of coaxing or repair attempts. She sat in their living room at midnight, staring at the silent machine and the half-finished dress spread across her work table, feeling the familiar weight of impossibility settling on her shoulders. In the morning, she would have to go to work and pretend everything was normal. In the evening, she would need to find a solution that didn't exist. The repair shop estimated a 2-week turnaround for fixing her machine. The nearest place that rented sewing equipment was across town and more expensive than her entire profit margin. She could ask Musa for help, but that would mean explaining everything: the business, the lies, the secret bank account, the late nights spent building something he didn't even know existed. Instead, she made a different choice. At 6 a.m. the next morning, she called in sick to work. The first sick day she'd taken in 2 years, and took 3 buses across Lagos to her mother's house in Surulere. Her mother, who had always been skeptical of Abeni's artistic pursuits, still had the heavy-duty sewing machine that had been a wedding gift decades earlier. "Abeni, what are you doing here?" her mother asked, surprised to find her daughter at the door with a bag full of fabric and a desperate expression. "Mama, I need to use your sewing machine. Just for today, it's important." Her mother studied her for a long moment, taking in the urgency in Abeni's voice, the tired determination in her eyes. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, Mama. I'm trying to get out of trouble." They worked together that day, mother and daughter, hands moving in synchrony over fabric that transformed into hope under their careful stitches. Her mother didn't ask many questions, but Abeni felt her watching, evaluating, perhaps remembering the young woman who had once filled sketchbooks with dreams before life taught her to be practical. "You've gotten better," her mother said quietly, as they attached the final details to the graduation dress. "Your stitching is more confident. Your finishing is professional." "I've been practicing." "On what?" The question hung in the air between them. Abeni looked at her mother, the woman who had always pushed her toward security, who had been relieved when she took the bank job, who had never quite understood why anyone would choose uncertainty over a steady paycheck. "I've been building something, Mama. Something that's mine." Her mother was quiet for a long time, examining the completed dress with the critical eye of someone who understood the difference between hobby-level work and professional craftsmanship. "This is beautiful work, Abeni. This is the work of someone who could make a living doing this." The validation hit Abeni like unexpected rain after a long drought. Her mother, the practical one, the skeptical one, the one who had always urged caution over creativity, was looking at her work with something that looked like pride. "Don't tell Papa? Or Musa?" "Not yet." Her mother nodded slowly. "When you're ready to tell them, you'll know." "But Abeni," she placed a weathered hand on her daughter's cheek, "don't wait too long to be proud of what you're building. Some things are too precious to keep hidden forever." That evening, Abeni delivered the dress to BC personally, traveling to her home in Ikeja and watching as the young woman tried it on for the first time. The transformation was immediate and magical. Shoulders straightened, smile widened, confidence bloomed like a flower opening to sunlight. "Auntie, this is perfect," Bissy said, spinning in front of the mirror while her mother took photos. "I feel so beautiful, so grown up, so ready." Ready. That was exactly what Abeni had been trying to create, clothes that made women feel ready for whatever came next. Ready for challenges, opportunities, celebrations, new chapters. As she rode the bus home that night, watching Lagos transform from day to night through the window, Abeni realized she felt ready too. Ready for something bigger than secret sewing sessions and midnight photography. Ready for something that couldn't be hidden much longer. She pulled out her phone and opened her Instagram account, scrolling through the growing collection of her work. 67 followers had become 600. Individual orders had become bulk requests. Women were tagging their friends, sharing her posts, asking when she would open a physical store. What had started as a whisper was becoming a voice. What had started as a candle flame was becoming a fire. And fire, Abeni knew, was impossible to contain forever. She just hadn't realized that when it finally burst into the open, it would illuminate everything, including the parts of her life she wasn't ready to examine in the light. Her phone buzzed with a new message from someone named Folak. "Hi. I run a small boutique in Victoria Island. Your work is incredible. Would you be interested in a wholesale partnership? I'd love to carry your designs in my store." Abeni stared at the message as the bus rumbled through the Lagos night, her reflection ghostly in the window beside her. A wholesale partnership, a boutique on Victoria Island. The possibility of her designs hanging in a real store where real customers could touch them, try them on, take them home. She thought about her mother's words. Some things are too precious to keep hidden forever. And she thought about Musa at home, probably wondering why she'd been sick, probably worried about her, probably completely unaware that his wife was on the verge of a breakthrough that would change everything. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would tell him about ABN Studios. Tomorrow she would step fully into the light of her own making. But as the bus carried her toward home and the life she was quietly outgrowing, Abeni couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow would bring more changes than she was prepared for. She was right.
Please tell me, are you enjoying the story? If so, tell me what lessons have you actually learned? I would really love to hear your comments in the comment section down below. And remember to support this channel, please subscribe, like the video, comment, just say something, even a word could literally mean a whole lot. So I want you to tell me what lessons have you learned from this story. Trust me, these are situations that most people actually go through. I'm sure some of you that are watching this story have actually gone through this situation. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear how you dealt with the situation that you were faced with.
Abeni hummed softly as she packed Musa's favorite lunch, jollof rice with grilled chicken, plantain on the side, and the spicy pepper sauce he claimed no restaurant could replicate properly. It was Thursday, which meant he'd be buried in back-to-back meetings all day, probably forgetting to eat until evening if she didn't intervene. These small acts of care had become routine over the years, but today they felt different, charged with anticipation. Tonight she had decided she would tell him everything. About ABN Studios, about the growing orders, about the wholesale opportunity that could change their lives, about the woman she was becoming in the spaces between his attention. The morning light streaming through their kitchen window seemed brighter somehow, as if the universe was preparing for revelation. She had rehearsed the conversation during her commute to work, practiced different ways of explaining how she'd built something substantial while he slept, while he traveled, while he lived his increasingly public life. "I have something exciting to share with you," she would say. Or maybe, "Remember how I used to design clothes? Well, I never really stopped." Or perhaps simply, "I have news that's going to surprise you." The anticipation made her feel light, almost giddy. After months of carrying the secret alone, she was ready to share the weight and the joy of what she'd accomplished. Musa's office was in a sleek building in Victoria Island, all glass and steel, reaching toward the Lagos sky like a monument to digital age ambition. Abeni had visited only a handful of times since he'd moved there. Usually he preferred to keep work and home life separate, claiming it helped him focus better. She signed in with security and took the elevator to the 14th floor, the lunch bag warm in her hands, her heart warm with the prospect of finally bridging the gap between her secret success and their shared life. The reception area was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and expensive furniture that spoke of a company doing well enough to invest in appearances. Normally, Musa would emerge from his office within minutes of her arrival, grateful for the interruption and the meal, ready to steal a few minutes of conversation before his next meeting. But today, the reception desk was empty except for a young woman Abeni had never seen before. She was probably in her mid-20s, with the kind of effortless beauty that made makeup look unnecessary and simple clothes look designer. Her hair was styled in a neat bob that suggested regular salon visits, and she wore a fitted dress that accentuated curves that were more pronounced than they had been the last time Abeni had glimpsed her in passing. Because she was pregnant, visibly, unmistakably pregnant, in that glowing second trimester way that made strangers smile and offer seats on public transport. "Excuse me," Abeni said politely, approaching the desk. "I'm looking for Musa Mwenda. I'm his wife." The young woman looked up from her computer screen and something shifted in her expression. A flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been amusement or might have been pity. "His wife," she repeated, her voice carrying a note of surprise that made Abeni's stomach clench with the first stirring of unease. "Yes, Abeni Mwenda. I brought him lunch." She held up the bag as evidence, feeling suddenly foolish for the gesture. The woman leaned back in her chair, one hand unconsciously resting on her rounded belly in the protective gesture common to expectant mothers. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you're the wife." She said it like she was placing a puzzle piece, solving a mystery that had been bothering her. "Musa told me you were his cousin, the one with sickle cell disease who helps with household things." The words hit Abeni like cold water, each syllable a small shock that combined into something much larger and more devastating. The lunch bag slipped from her fingers, landing on the polished floor with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet reception area. "His cousin," she repeated slowly, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "With sickle cell," the woman continued, apparently oblivious to the destruction she was causing with her casual revelation. "He said you've been having a hard time, health-wise, so you help around the house in exchange for a place to stay. Very charitable of him, really. Though I told him he should probably put some boundaries in place now that we're—" She gestured to her belly with obvious pride. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Abeni's feet. Cousin. Sick cousin. Someone who helped with household things in exchange for charity. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of love and sacrifice and shared dreams, reduced to a convenient fiction that allowed him to— What? Explain away her presence in his life to his pregnant girlfriend? "We're having a boy," the woman continued, either not noticing or not caring about Abeni's stunned silence. "Due in December. Musa is so excited. He says he's always wanted to be a father." Always wanted to be a father. But in 6 years of marriage, he had never once mentioned wanting children with Abeni. Every time she had brought up the possibility of starting a family, he had redirected the conversation to his business, his goals, their need to wait until they were more established. "What's your name?" Abeni asked quietly, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Kioma. Kioma Okafor. Soon to be Kioma Mwenda, hopefully." She giggled, a sound that would have been charming in any other context, but now felt like glass breaking in Abeni's chest. "Soon to be? Well, we haven't set a date yet, but Musa says once the baby comes and his business expansion is complete, we'll make it official. He wants to do it properly, you know? Big wedding, all our families together. He's such a perfectionist about everything." The words kept coming, each one a small violence, each revelation a fresh wound. Musa was planning a wedding with his pregnant girlfriend while still married to the woman he had reduced to a sick cousin in need of charity. Abeni bent to pick up the lunch bag, her movements careful and controlled, though her hands were shaking. "Is he in his office?" "Oh, he's in meetings all day, but I can give him the food if you'd like. I usually handle his personal needs now." Personal needs. The phrase hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Abeni's skin crawl. No, she said quietly. That won't be necessary. She turned toward the elevator, each step feeling like she was walking through water, her movement slow and dreamlike. Behind her, she could hear Kiyoma's voice, cheerful and oblivious. It was nice meeting you. I'll tell Musa you stopped by. The elevator doors closed, and Abeni found herself alone with her reflection in the polished steel. A woman holding a lunch bag for a husband who had erased her existence so completely that his pregnant girlfriend didn't even know she existed. The ride down to the ground floor felt eternal, 14 floors of descent that matched the free fall happening in her chest, where everything she thought she knew about her life was crumbling into pieces too small to identify. On the street outside, Lagos rushed past in its usual chaos of cars and pedestrians and hawkers selling everything imaginable. The normal world continuing as if nothing had changed, as if her universe hadn't just been rewritten in the space of a 5-minute conversation. She walked without direction, still carrying the lunch that would never be eaten, still processing the casual way Kiyoma had delivered information that destroyed everything. The pregnancy, the wedding plans, the complete erasure of Abeni's identity in Musa's version of his life. Cousin with sickle cell, helper who exchanged household labor for charity. That's what 6 years of love had amounted to in his mind. That's what their marriage meant when it became inconvenient to his new narrative. She found herself in a small park, sitting on a bench under a tree whose name she didn't know, staring at the lunch bag in her lap. The jollof rice would be getting cold. The plantain would be losing its sweetness. The pepper sauce would be congealing. All that care, all that thought, all that love, wasted on a man who had reduced her to a fiction. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Musa. In meetings all day. Don't wait up for dinner tonight. Working late on the expansion proposal. Working late, with his pregnant girlfriend, who thought she was going to become his wife. Abeni stared at the message for a long time, then slowly, deliberately deleted it without responding. She pulled out her phone and opened Instagram, scrolling to her business account, at ABN Studios, where 847 followers were engaging with photos of clothes she had designed, created and marketed entirely on her own. Comments from satisfied customers, direct messages from potential wholesale partners, notifications of new orders from women who valued her work enough to pay for it. Here, in this digital space she had built thread by thread, she wasn't a cousin or a charity case or a convenient fiction. She was ABN, a designer whose work was increasingly sought after, whose vision was resonating with women across Lagos and beyond. The contrast was stark and illuminating. In Musa's world, she had been systematically erased until she barely existed. In her own world, the one she had been building in secret, she was becoming more real, more powerful, more herself every day. She thought about the wholesale opportunity waiting for her response, about the boutique owner who wanted to feature her designs, about her mother's words, "Don't wait too long to be proud of what you're building." And she thought about Kiyoma's casual cruelty, delivered with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in Musa's life, who had been given explanations and promises and a future that included a wedding and a baby and a man who was already married to someone else. The lunch bag felt heavy in her lap, weighted with all the care she had wasted on someone who saw her as so disposable that he could pretend she didn't exist. Slowly, Abeni stood up and walked to the nearest trash bin. She dropped the bag inside, listening to the soft thump as it hit the bottom, the sound of the last meal she would ever cook for a man who had already decided she was nothing. Then she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Folake, the boutique owner. "I'm very interested in discussing the partnership. When can we meet?" The response came within minutes. "How about tomorrow? I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something big." Something big. Not something charitable or temporary or fictional, something real and substantial and hers. Abeni walked back toward the bus stop, her steps steadier now, her phone buzzing with business notifications that reminded her she had value, she had talent, she had built something worth building. Behind her, in the glass tower that housed Musa's success, a pregnant woman sat at a reception desk, probably already forgetting about the strange encounter with the sick cousin who had brought lunch for a man who was too busy planning his future to remember his past. But ahead of her, waiting to be claimed, was a life that Abeni was finally ready to step into fully, not as someone's wife or cousin or charity case, but as herself, as the woman who had learned to build empires in the spaces between other people's attention, and who was about to discover that some empires, once revealed, change everything. 18 months later, the boutique in Victoria Island was everything Abeni had imagined and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in the afternoon light that made her fabrics glow like stained glass. Elegant mannequins displayed her latest collection, pieces that had evolved from simple dresses into a complete lifestyle brand that spoke to the modern African woman navigating tradition and ambition. The response has been incredible, Folake said, reviewing the sales reports spread across her desk. We can barely keep your pieces in stock. The blue wrap dress sold out in 2 days. The professional collection is being requested by name. Abeni nodded, making notes in the leather portfolio that had replaced her old sketchbooks. ABN Studios had grown beyond her wildest projections. What had started as midnight sewing sessions had become a full production operation with 3 seamstresses, a dedicated studio space, and waiting lists for custom pieces. I think we're ready to expand, she said quietly, the words carrying weight she couldn't have imagined 2 years ago. I've been approached by stores in Abuja and Port Harcourt. There's interest from retailers in Accra and Nairobi too. International expansion, Folak mused. That's big business territory, Abeni. You'll need to think about trademark protection, supply chain management, maybe bringing in investors. Investors, the word that had once belonged exclusively to Musa's vocabulary, was now part of her reality. The irony wasn't lost on her. While he had been busy explaining away her existence, she had been building something that would soon require the same level of business sophistication he prided himself on. I have a meeting with a trademark attorney next week, Abeni said, and I've been talking to a friend of my mother's who understands textile supply chains. I want to make sure everything is done properly. What she didn't say was that she had learned to be careful about who she trusted with her dreams. What she didn't mention was that every business decision was made with the hard-won knowledge that the people closest to you could also be the most dangerous to your success. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another order, the 3rd one that hour. The steady stream of sales had become the soundtrack to her days, each transaction a small validation that she had built something real, something wanted, something valuable. Before I forget, Folak said, reaching for a folder on her desk, there's a journalist who wants to feature you in Genevieve magazine. She's doing a piece on emerging African designers who are reshaping the fashion landscape, says ABN Studios is exactly the kind of success story they want to highlight. Abeni's pen paused over her notes. A magazine feature would mean photos, interviews, her name and face associated with her brand, in a way that would make her success impossible to ignore or explain away. What kind of questions would they ask? The usual, your inspiration, your journey, what drives your design aesthetic. They love stories about women who started from nothing and built something significant. Started from nothing, the phrase resonated more than Folaki could know. In many ways, that's exactly what had happened. Abeni had started from nothing. Or rather, from less than nothing. She had started from a place where her existence had been so thoroughly erased that a pregnant woman could look her in the eye and not recognize her as human enough to deserve the truth. I'll consider it, she said, though part of her was already composing responses to interview questions she had never expected to be asked. That evening, as she reviewed designs in her studio space, a converted warehouse in Yaba that hummed with the energy of creation, Abeni allowed herself a moment to appreciate how far she had traveled from that devastating afternoon in the park. The studio was organized chaos, bolts of fabric in every color imaginable, 3 industrial sewing machines running simultaneously, design sketches taped to every available wall surface, and the constant movement of her team bringing ideas to life. Auntie Abeni, called Blessing, her lead seamstress. The customer from Abuja wants to know if we can make the green dress in size 18. She says her sister saw it on Instagram and fell in love. Check our fabric inventory, Abeni replied, not looking up from the pattern she was adjusting. If we have enough of the green silk, yes. If not, ask if she'd consider the forest green cotton instead. It photographs beautifully. This was her language now: fabric weights and inventory management, color theory and production timelines, customer satisfaction and quality control. She had learned to speak business fluently, not because someone taught her, but because building something from nothing required mastering every aspect of its creation. Her phone rang, a video call from her mother, who had become her unofficial business advisor and fiercest supporter. "Abeni, I saw the photos from today's photo shoot on your Instagram," her mother said, her face beaming from the phone screen. "You look like a CEO." "I am a CEO, Mama," Abeni replied with a smile, even if it's still sinking in. "Your father saw the pictures too. He's been showing them to everyone at his church. Look at my daughter," he says. "Look at what she built with her own hands." The pride in her mother's voice was something Abeni had been hungry for without realizing it. Recognition not just for her talent, but for her business acumen, her persistence, her ability to transform pain into purpose. "There's something else," her mother continued, her expression becoming more serious. "I heard something today. About Musa." Abeni's hand stilled on the fabric she had been examining. In the 18 months since the devastating revelation about Kioma, she had heard fragments of information about her estranged husband's life. His business expansion, the birth of his son, his increasing prominence in Lagos tech circles. But she had learned to treat news about him like weather reports from a country she no longer lived in. Interesting perhaps, but irrelevant to her daily reality. "What did you hear?" His girlfriend, the one with the baby, she left him, took the child and moved back to her family in Owerri. People are saying she discovered he was still married. To you. The information hung in the air between them, significant and somehow anticlimactic at the same time. Kioma had learned what Abeni had known for 18 months, that Musa was capable of constructing elaborate fictions to serve his immediate needs, regardless of who got hurt in the process. "I see," Abeni said quietly. "That's all? I see?" Abeni considered the question seriously. A year ago, news of Musa's relationship troubles might have felt like vindication or justice, or at least poetic irony. But now it felt like information about a character in a story she had stopped reading. "Mama, I don't wish him ill, but I also don't wish him well. He's become irrelevant to my happiness." It was true, she realized as she said it. Somewhere in the process of building ABN Studios, of seeing her designs come to life, of watching women light up when they tried on clothes that made them feel beautiful and confident, Musa had faded from emotional relevance in her life. Not because she had forgiven him, forgiveness would require energy she preferred to invest elsewhere, but because she had simply outgrown the space where his approval or disapproval mattered. "He's started a podcast," her mother continued, "about business and entrepreneurship. He has guests, talks about success strategies, interviews other tech founders." "Good for him," Abeni said, and meant it in the most neutral way possible. "He also talks about women in business sometimes, not very kindly." This caught Abeni's attention. "What do you mean?" "Last week's episode was about female entrepreneurs. He said most women who try to start businesses are just playing dress-up with real concepts. Said they lack the analytical thinking and long-term vision necessary for true success." The irony was so complete it was almost funny. While Musa pontificated about women's alleged business limitations to his podcast audience, his wife was managing supply chains, negotiating with international retailers, and building a brand that was becoming synonymous with sophisticated African fashion. Did anyone challenge him on that? His guest laughed along with him. They shared stories about women they knew who had failed at business ventures, as if those failures proved something universal about women's capabilities. Abeni felt a familiar fire kindle in her chest. Not anger exactly, but something more focused and potentially more dangerous. She thought about all the women who had bought her clothes, not just because they were beautiful, but because they were created by someone who understood their lives, their challenges, their need to feel powerful in a world that often conspired to make them feel small. "Send me the link to his podcast," she said. "Abeni, not for the reason you think, Mama. I want to understand what I'm dealing with. Knowledge is power." That night, alone in her apartment, which she had moved to after finally filing for legal separation, Abeni listened to 3 episodes of Musa's podcast. His voice was confident, polished, professional. He spoke with the authority of someone whose success had never been questioned, whose expertise had never been dismissed, whose dreams had never been treated as cute hobbies to be indulged when convenient. The episode about female entrepreneurs was particularly enlightening, not because of what it revealed about women, but because of what it revealed about him. The casual dismissal, the broad generalizations, the complete inability to imagine that women might face different challenges rather than having different capabilities. The problem with women in business, he said in his smooth podcast voice, is that they think passion is a business plan. They think emotional investment can substitute for market analysis. They confuse feeling strongly about something with understanding how to monetize it successfully. Abeni paused the recording and looked around her apartment, at the business plan taped to her wall, at the spreadsheets tracking her revenue growth, at the market research she had compiled about the gap in professional wear for African women, at the financial projections that had convinced 3 different potential investors to request follow-up meetings. Then she looked at her phone, where Instagram notifications showed her latest post. A behind-the-scenes video of her design process had received over 2,000 likes and dozens of comments from women sharing how her clothes had made them feel more confident at work, at church, at important family events. Passion and business acumen. Emotional investment and market analysis. These weren't opposing forces in her experience. They were complementary strengths that informed each other and created something more powerful than either could be alone. She resumed the podcast, listening as Musa and his guest discussed the importance of objective decision-making and rational planning, completely oblivious to the fact that one of them was married to a woman who embodied everything they claimed was impossible. When the episode ended, Abeni sat in the quiet of her apartment and felt something crystallize in her mind. Not revenge. Revenge was too small, too personal, too tied to the past. But something bigger. Something that would benefit not just herself, but all the women who had been dismissed, underestimated, explained away, or erased. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to the journalist from Genevieve magazine. "I've reconsidered your request for an interview. I think it's time for ABN Studios to tell its story publicly. I have some things to say about women in business that I believe your readers would find interesting." The response came within an hour. "Wonderful. We're planning the feature for our next issue. The theme is Quiet Revolutionaries, women who are changing industries without making a lot of noise about it. You sound perfect." Quiet revolutionaries. The phrase made Abeni smile. She had indeed been conducting a revolution, but quietly, systematically, and with the kind of strategic thinking that her estranged husband claimed women lacked. Soon that revolution would no longer be quiet. And when the world finally saw what she had built in silence, they would understand that the most dangerous thing you can do to a capable woman is underestimate her. Because while you're busy explaining why she can't succeed, she's already succeeding. She's just doing it so quietly that you don't notice until it's impossible to ignore. Present day, 6 months after the magazine feature. The Genevieve magazine cover had changed everything. The striking photo of Abeni in one of her own designs, standing in her bustling studio with the headline, "The Quiet Revolutionary, How ABN Studios Built an Empire in Secret," had hit newsstands 3 weeks ago and refused to leave the public consciousness. Orders had tripled overnight. Her Instagram following had jumped from 15,000 to over 200,000. International fashion blogs were calling her Africa's best-kept secret, and the designer redefining contemporary African elegance. 3 investors had made formal offers for partnerships. A documentary crew from the UK had requested an interview, but perhaps most satisfying of all was the silence from Musa. No congratulatory text, no acknowledgement of her success, no comment on the fact that his wife, the woman he had reduced to a fictional sick cousin, was now being celebrated across Africa as one of the continent's most promising young entrepreneurs. The silence spoke volumes about his character, but it also freed her to take the next logical step in her journey. Legal separation and the formal end of a marriage that had been dead in all but paperwork for 2 years. Which was how she found herself back in the courtroom where this story began, watching Musa sign divorce papers with the satisfied smile of a man who believed he was finally free from dead weight. "Finally," he said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of relief mixed with superiority. "I'm free from dead weight." The words should have stung. 6 months ago, they might have. But now, as Abeni sat across from him in her tailored blazer, a design from her latest collection that had sold out within hours of the magazine feature, she felt nothing but curiosity about how someone could be so catastrophically wrong about another person while remaining so confident in their assessment. Judge Adebayo cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to the legal formalities. "Before we proceed, there's one more financial detail to read into the record." Abeni watched Musa's expression shift from satisfaction to mild irritation. He was probably thinking about his lunch meeting or his podcast recording session or whatever other important business was waiting for him after he finished disposing of his unwanted wife. "What financial disclosure?" he asked, his tone suggesting this was an unnecessary delay to his liberation. "Assets and business ownership declarations," Judge Adebayo replied, reaching for the documents Abeni's lawyer had submitted that morning. "Standard procedure." The lawyer had advised her that full financial disclosure wasn't strictly necessary for their separation. Their finances had been largely separate for years, and she was asking for nothing from him. But Abeni had insisted on transparency. Not for legal reasons, but for the simple satisfaction of watching understanding dawn on his face when he realized exactly what he had been dismissing for years. Mrs. Mwenda's legal counsel submitted additional documentation this morning. The judge continued, adjusting his reading glasses. Abeni watched Musa's face carefully. The confusion was genuine. In all their years together, through all their conversations about money and dreams and future plans, he had never once asked her what she did during her hours away from their shared life. He had never inquired about the packages that arrived with her name on them, never wondered about the phone calls she took in hushed tones, never questioned the gradual improvement in her personal wardrobe, or the way she had quietly started paying for certain household expenses. He had been too busy becoming successful to notice that she might be becoming something too. "Just read it," Musa said, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's get this over with." The words were casual, careless, tinged with the impatience of someone who had places to be and people to see. People who mattered. People who weren't dead weight. Judge Adebayo began to read, "Business Registration and Ownership Declaration for ABN Studios, a fashion design and manufacturing company incorporated in Lagos State." The change in Musa's expression was subtle at first. A slight tightening around his eyes, a barely perceptible shift in his posture. The name ABN Studios was familiar to him now, thanks to the magazine coverage that had been impossible to avoid if you moved in Lagos business circles. Annual gross revenue for the past fiscal year, 34.7 million naira. Now the changes were more obvious. Musa's casual pen-clicking stopped. His shoulders straightened, his eyes fixed on Judge Adebayo with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. Current business valuation, 58.3 million naira, with projected growth of 60% over the next 18 months. The room had gone very quiet. Even the court clerk had stopped typing, drawn into the drama of revelation unfolding before them. Partnership agreements with retailers in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Accra and Nairobi. Export contracts with distributors in South Africa, Kenya and Ghana. Currently in negotiations with potential investors for Series A funding round. Musa's head turned slowly toward Abeni, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first stirring of a realization so large it seemed to physically impact him. "ABN Studios," he said slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "ABN." The initials that had been staring him in the face for months, in magazine headlines and Instagram posts and business news articles he had probably skimmed past without connecting to the woman sitting across from him. Abeni met his gaze steadily, her voice calm as morning water when she spoke. "Abeni Beatrice Nkem. My grandmother's name was Beatrice. The studio is named after both of us. You." He started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing like someone whose entire understanding of reality was being rewritten in real time. You own ABN Studios? I built ABN Studios, the company that was featured in Genevieve magazine. The same one. The designer everyone's been talking about? Apparently. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. This wasn't the silence of a woman who had nothing to say. This was the silence of a woman who had been saying everything all along in a language he had never bothered to learn. How long? He asked, his voice hoarse with something that might have been shock or might have been the beginning of understanding how badly he had miscalculated. 3 years. Since the night you told your friend I was sweet, but you deserved better. Since the night I realized I was disappearing in our marriage and decided to remember who I was without you. Judge Adebayo continued reading, his professional voice providing a steady counterpoint to the emotional devastation playing out before him. Employment of 12 full-time staff members, trademark protection in 6 African countries, currently featured in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art. The Smithsonian, Musa's voice cracked slightly. They acquired 3 pieces from my heritage collection, Abeni said quietly. The curator said they represent the evolution of contemporary African design. She watched him process this information. His wife, the woman he had explained away to his pregnant girlfriend, the dead weight he was finally discarding, had created work that was considered museum-worthy by international institutions. The settlement, Judge Adebayo concluded, indicates that Mrs. Mwenda is claiming no financial support or division of marital assets, as her independent business interests provide sufficient income for her post-divorce life. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Abeni wasn't just successful, she was successful enough that she needed nothing from him. No alimony, no shared assets, no financial entanglement that would tie her to his life beyond this moment. She had built something so substantial that she could afford to walk away from him with nothing but her freedom. Musa sat back in his chair, his expensive clothes and carefully cultivated image suddenly feeling inadequate in the face of what he was learning. When you said you were making something that night, you meant this. All of this. I meant exactly what I said. I was making something. For me. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung in the air, and Abeni considered it seriously. She could have talked about the way he dismissed her creative interests, or how he had never asked about her work, or how he had been too busy planning his future with another woman to notice her building one of her own. Instead, she gave him the simplest, most devastating answer: you never asked. 2 words that contained everything, all the years of him talking about his dreams while never inquiring about hers. All the evenings he spent showing her his latest achievements while never wondering what she had achieved. All the conversations about their future that somehow never included space for her individual aspirations. I would have supported you, he said, and for the first time since she'd known him, Musa sounded uncertain, almost pleading. Would you have? Abeni asked gently. Or would you have given me well-meaning advice about being practical, about focusing on my stable job, about not taking unnecessary risks while you were building your business? She could see in his expression that she was right. He would have been supportive in the way that men often are when women have hobbies, encouraging as long as those hobbies don't interfere with the real business of life, which was supporting his success. The podcast, he said suddenly, understanding hitting him like a physical blow. The things I said about women in business. I listened to every episode, Abeni confirmed, including the ones where you explained why women lack the analytical thinking and long-term vision necessary for true success. The irony was complete and inescapable. He had been married to a woman who embodied everything he claimed was impossible, living in the same house as proof that contradicted every assumption he had made about women's business capabilities, sharing a bed with someone who was systematically building exactly the kind of strategic, analytical, successful enterprise he claimed women couldn't create. Judge Adebayo gathered the papers with the efficiency of someone who had presided over many dramatic revelations, but rarely one quite this cinematically perfect. The dissolution is complete. Mrs. Mwenda, you're free to resume your maiden name if you choose. I'll be keeping Mwenda for now. Abeni said quietly. ABN Studios is already trademarked under that name, and brand consistency is important in business. Even now, even in this moment of personal conclusion, she was thinking like the CEO she had become. The detail wasn't lost on Musa, who was beginning to understand that the woman he had dismissed as dead weight had been learning to speak the language of business fluency while he slept. As they stood to leave, Musa made one final attempt at connection. Abeni, I made mistakes, big ones. But what you've built is incredible. Maybe we could talk sometime? About business? About the future? She paused at the door, considering his words with the same careful attention she gave to business proposals that crossed her desk. Musa, she said finally, you spent 6 years proving to me that I was invisible to you. I spent 3 years proving to myself that I never needed to be seen by you to be extraordinary. She turned toward the corridor, walking with the quiet confidence of a woman who had just closed one chapter of her life and was ready to write the next entirely on her own terms. But if you're genuinely interested in learning about women in business, she added over her shoulder, I'd recommend you interview some for your podcast. You might be surprised by what you discover. As the courtroom door closed behind her, Abeni pulled out her phone to check her messages. 17 new orders had come in during the 2 hours she'd spent finalizing her divorce. Her assistant had forwarded 3 interview requests from international fashion magazines. Her lawyer had sent confirmation that the trademark expansion into European markets had been approved. Outside the courthouse, Lagos hummed with its usual energy of ambition and possibility. Somewhere in the traffic, women were wearing clothes she had designed, feeling confident and beautiful and ready for whatever challenges awaited them. And in a courthouse behind her, a man sat alone with the devastating realization that he had just signed away the most remarkable woman he would ever meet, because he had been too blind to see her when she was standing right in front of him. The woman who had built an empire in the spaces between his attention was now free to build whatever came next. And she was just getting started. 3 months after the divorce, the auditorium at the University of Lagos was packed beyond capacity. Students sat in the aisles, stood along the walls, and gathered outside where speakers had been set up to broadcast the TEDx talk that had generated more advance buzz than any other event in the university's recent history. Backstage, Abeni smoothed the fabric of her dress, a piece from her latest collection that had sold out within hours of its debut, and reviewed her notes one final time. But she didn't really need them. The words she was about to speak had been written in her heart over 6 years of marriage, 3 years of secret building, and countless moments of being told, in ways both subtle and explicit, that her dreams were too small to matter. 5 minutes, Ms. Mwenda, the event coordinator whispered, his own nervousness evident despite his professional composure. The live stream has over 50,000 viewers already, and we haven't even started. 50,000 people waiting to hear what she had to say. 6 months ago, that number would have terrified her. Now it felt like responsibility. All those viewers included women who had been told to be practical, to support others' dreams instead of chasing their own, to disappear quietly into the background of more important people's lives. She thought about the messages that had flooded her Instagram since the magazine feature. Women sharing stories of dreams deferred, businesses started in secret, talents hidden because someone had convinced them those talents weren't valuable enough to pursue publicly. Ms. Mwenda? The coordinator looked at her expectantly. I'm ready, she said, and meant it in ways that transcended this single moment. The walk from backstage to the podium felt both eternal and instantaneous. The applause was thunderous, but what struck her most was the sea of faces looking back at her. Young women, older women, some men too, all waiting to hear something that might change how they thought about their own possibilities. She stood at the microphone for a moment, letting the silence build, looking out at an audience that represented every woman who had ever been told she was too much or not enough, too ambitious or not ambitious enough, too visible or too invisible. 6 years ago, she began, her voice clear and steady. My husband told a friend that I was sweet, but he deserved better. He didn't know I was listening. He didn't know that his words would change the trajectory of both our lives in ways he couldn't imagine. The auditorium was completely still now, the kind of attention that speakers dream of commanding. I want to talk to you today about the women they don't see. The women who are building empires in the spaces between other people's attention. The women who have learned that if you wait for permission to be extraordinary, you'll spend your life being ordinary. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of her old sewing machine covered by a sheet in the corner of their apartment. This is where my empire began, under a bedsheet in the corner of a living room, while my husband slept in the next room and dreamed about his future. For 3 years, I built ABN studios in the hours when the world wasn't watching, not because I was hiding, but because I was growing. The next slide showed her first Instagram post, a simple photo of a dress she'd made with 12 likes and no comments. They say success happens overnight. They're wrong. Success happens in the dark hours when everyone else is sleeping. It happens in the moments when you choose your dreams over your doubts. It happens when you stop asking for permission and start building anyway. Click, a photo of her studio today, bustling with activity, 12 employees working on orders that came in faster than they could fulfill them. Today, ABN Studios employs 12 people. We ship to 6 countries. Our designs are in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian. We generate nearly 60 million naira annually, and we're growing faster than I ever imagined possible. The applause was spontaneous and sustained, but she held up a hand to continue. But I'm not here to talk about my success. I'm here to talk about yours. Because there are women in this audience right now who have dreams they've been told are too small, too impractical, too unrealistic. And I'm here to tell you that the people who say those things are wrong. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. They called me quiet, but it was my silence that cracked the walls. While they were talking about what women couldn't do, I was busy doing it. While they were explaining why female entrepreneurs fail, I was building something they couldn't imagine. Click. A collage of messages from customers, women sharing photos of themselves in ABN designs, talking about feeling confident, powerful, ready for new challenges. Every piece I design is created with one question in mind. How can this help a woman feel ready? Ready for the job interview, ready for the important meeting, ready for the first date, ready for the difficult conversation, ready for whatever moment requires her to show up as her most powerful self. She paused, scanning the audience, making eye contact with individual faces. Because that's what we're really talking about when we talk about women supporting women. We're not just buying clothes or products or services. We're buying confidence. We're buying permission to take up space. We're buying the armor that helps us fight battles in boardrooms and classrooms and courtrooms and anywhere else the world tries to make us smaller. The energy in the room was electric now, the kind of collective engagement that transforms an audience into a movement. I learned something important during those 3 years of building in secret. You don't need anyone's permission to be extraordinary. You don't need anyone's approval to pursue your dreams. You don't need anyone's validation to know your worth. Click, a quote appeared on the screen. The most dangerous thing you can do to a capable woman is underestimate her. My former husband spent 6 years underestimating me. His podcast listeners heard him explain why women lack the analytical thinking necessary for business success, while he was married to a woman who was proving him wrong every single day. Murmurs rippled through the audience, some laughter, some gasps of recognition. But here's what I want you to understand. His blindness to my capabilities didn't diminish those capabilities. His inability to see my value didn't reduce my value. His failure to recognize my potential didn't limit my potential. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dropping to an intimate register that somehow reached every corner of the auditorium. Ladies, stop waiting for people to see you. Start building something so undeniable that they can't unsee you. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Applause, cheers, and the sound of phones being pulled out to capture and share what they'd just heard. But let me be clear about something, she continued once the noise subsided. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about proving anyone wrong. This is about proving yourself right. This is about taking the dreams you've been carrying and giving them the space to breathe, to grow, to become real. Click. The final slide was simple text. Build in silence. Let success make the noise. 3 years ago, I was a woman whose husband explained away my existence to his pregnant girlfriend. Today, I'm a woman who explains success to audiences of thousands. The difference isn't that I became more capable. The difference is that I stopped asking for permission to use the capabilities I'd always had. She gripped the sides of the podium, her final words carrying the weight of everything she'd learned. So here's my challenge to every woman in this room, every woman watching this live stream, every woman who has ever been told her dreams are too big or too small or too anything. Stop building small lives to accommodate small minds. Stop making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never designed for your magnitude. Her voice rose to fill every corner of the space. Build something so beautiful, so powerful, so undeniably yours that the world has no choice but to make room for it. Build in silence if you must, but build. And when your empire rises from that silence, let the thunder of your success speak for every woman who was told she couldn't. The standing ovation began before she finished speaking and continued long after she stepped away from the podium. Students rushed toward the stage, reaching out to touch her hand, to thank her, to tell her their own stories of dreams deferred and ambitions dismissed. But what moved Abeni most was the text message that appeared on her phone as she finally made her way backstage. Watching your TEDx talk. You just changed my life. Starting my business tomorrow. Thank you for showing us what's possible. Sarah. It was followed by dozens more like it, from women across Africa and beyond who had been waiting for permission that they finally realized they didn't need. Within 6 hours, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. Within a week, it had been translated into 15 languages and shared across every social media platform. The phrase, "build in silence," became a hashtag used by thousands of women launching businesses, pursuing dreams, and refusing to wait for permission to be extraordinary. But perhaps the most significant response came in the form of an email from the organizers of the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Nairobi. Ms. Mwenda, after seeing your TEDx talk, we would like to invite you to be our keynote speaker. Your message about women building empires in silence resonates globally. Would you be available to address our audience of international business leaders? A global stage, an international audience, the opportunity to carry her message beyond Africa to women everywhere who needed to hear that their dreams were valid, their capabilities were real, and their potential was limitless. Abeni looked around her dressing room, at the flowers sent by supporters, at the business cards from investors wanting to partner with her, at the interview requests from media outlets around the world. 6 years ago, she had been a woman whose existence was so thoroughly dismissed that she could be explained away as a sick cousin. Today, she was a woman whose voice was reaching millions, whose story was inspiring movements, whose success was creating space for other women to dream bigger. The transformation wasn't magic, it wasn't luck, it wasn't even talent, though talent had played a role. It was the simple revolutionary act of refusing to accept other people's limitations as her own truth. And tomorrow, she would continue building, not in silence anymore, but with the full thunder of a voice that had learned its own power. The empire she had built in whispers was becoming a revolution spoken in voices that refused to be silenced. 2 weeks after the TEDx talk, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under the door of Abeni's new office in Victoria Island, like an apology trying to sneak in unnoticed. Her assistant, Folak, who had become much more than a business partner and now served as her chief operating officer, found it first. "There's a handwritten letter for you," Folak said, holding the envelope with the careful distance of someone who recognized the handwriting and understood its potential to disrupt. From him. Abeni looked up from the contract she was reviewing, a partnership agreement with a major retailer in London that would bring ABN Studios to European markets. The irony wasn't lost on her that Musa's letter had arrived on the same day she was signing deals that would expand her empire beyond anything he had achieved with his tech company. "Just leave it on my desk," she said quietly. "I'll read it later." But later stretched into evening and evening into night, and still the letter sat unopened beside her laptop like a small white flag of surrender that she wasn't sure she wanted to acknowledge. It wasn't that she was afraid of what it might say. Fear had become a foreign emotion when it came to Musa. His words no longer had the power to wound her, to make her doubt herself, to convince her that she was less than she knew herself to be. But opening the letter felt like looking backward when everything in her life was pulling her forward. Finally, as Lagos settled into its late-night rhythm and her office grew quiet, Abeni picked up the envelope. Her name was written across it in the careful script she remembered from their university days, when he used to write her love notes and slip them into her textbooks. She opened it slowly, unfolding 3 pages of handwriting that looked more labored than she remembered, as if the words had been difficult to write. Abeni, the letter began. I've started this letter 100 times. Deleted emails, torn up drafts, stood outside your office building twice without the courage to come up. I don't know if you'll read this or if you'll throw it away the moment you see my handwriting, but I need to try to say what I should have said years ago. I was wrong. Not just about you, though I was catastrophically wrong about you. I was wrong about marriage, about partnership, about what it means to love someone. I was wrong about success and ambition and the difference between building something and destroying something. I was wrong about women, about business, about everything that mattered. I watched your TEDx talk 17 times. The first time was by accident. Someone shared it in our startup group chat with the comment, "This woman is incredible." I didn't recognize you at first. You looked so confident, so powerful, so completely certain of your worth. It took me 3 full minutes to understand that the woman commanding a stage and speaking to millions was my wife. My ex-wife. I have to remember that now. The woman I called dead weight had become someone who could change lives with her words. The woman I dismissed as impractical had built something more substantial than anything I'd ever created. The woman I explained away to other people had become someone the world was eager to listen to. I've been reading about ABN Studios obsessively since our divorce. Every interview, every article, every social media post. Did you know that Forbes Africa named you one of their 30 under 30 to watch? Did you know that the BBC featured your story in their series on African innovators? Did you know that 3 universities have reached out about having you speak to their entrepreneurship programs? Of course you know. These are your achievements, your life, your success that I was never part of. But here's what keeps me awake at night. I was there for all of it. I was in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, eating meals at the same table while you were building something extraordinary. How did I miss it? How did I live with genius and never recognize it? How did I share space with someone so remarkable and somehow convince myself that I was the only one with anything valuable to offer? I keep thinking about that night you were sewing, and I asked what you were making. You said something for me, and I nodded and went back to my laptop without asking another question. I never asked another question. For 3 years you built an empire, and I never asked a single follow-up question about what you were creating. That's not love, Abeni. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't love. Love asks questions. Love pays attention. Love sees potential and nurtures it instead of ignoring it. Love doesn't reduce someone to a fictional sick cousin. Love doesn't dismiss 6 years of partnership to justify new relationships. Love doesn't mock women's business capabilities while living with a woman who embodies everything you claim is impossible. I've lost everything that mattered. Kioma left when she discovered I was still married, not because she cared about the legal technicality, but because she realized I was capable of creating elaborate lies to serve my immediate needs. The baby I thought would be my legacy is being raised by someone who has every reason to teach him that his father is not a man to be trusted or admired. My business is struggling. The app that once seemed so innovative now feels dated, unimaginative. I've been trying to pivot, to find new revenue streams, to recapture the momentum I had 3 years ago. But it's hard to focus on building something when you're haunted by the knowledge that you destroyed something infinitely more valuable. I see your success everywhere now. Women wearing your designs on the street, in restaurants, in business meetings. Your name mentioned in conversations about African fashion, female entrepreneurship, creative innovation. You've become unavoidable in the best possible way, not because you're seeking attention, but because your work is so undeniably excellent that attention seeks you. And I think about how different things could have been if I had been the man you deserved, if I had asked questions instead of making assumptions, if I had supported your dreams instead of ignoring them, if I had seen your potential instead of being threatened by it. We could have built empires together. Instead, you built one alone while I built walls between us. I'm not writing this letter to ask for forgiveness, though I hope someday you might find it possible to forgive me. I'm not writing to ask for another chance, though the thought of spending my life without you feels like a punishment that perfectly fits my crime. I'm writing because I need you to know that I see you now. Finally, completely, devastatingly. I see you. I see the woman who never stopped believing in her own potential, even when the person closest to her acted like that potential didn't exist. I see the entrepreneur who built something beautiful from scratch while working a full-time job and managing a household and being a wife to someone who didn't deserve her. I see the designer whose clothes don't just make women look good, they make women feel powerful. I see the CEO who speaks about success with the humility of someone who remembers what it felt like to be underestimated. I see the public speaker who uses her platform not to settle scores, but to lift up other women who are where she used to be. I see the person who turned her pain into purpose and her dismissal into a movement. I see everything I was too blind to see when it was right in front of me. I heard about your invitation to speak at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Nairobi. I heard about the documentary being made about African women in business, with you as one of the featured subjects. I heard about the book deal, the international expansion, the foundation you're starting to support women entrepreneurs. I heard about all of it because everyone is talking about you now. You've become impossible to ignore, which is the perfect justice for someone who was ignored for too long. I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to claim any connection to your success, no right to feel pride in achievements that happened despite me rather than because of me. But I can't help feeling something when I read about your latest accomplishment or see your photo in another magazine. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's regret, maybe it's just the recognition of what I had and threw away. I want you to know that I've learned from watching your success. I've changed how I talk about women in business, not just on my podcast, but in private conversations, in meetings, in every context where I used to casually dismiss what I didn't understand. I can't undo the damage of my previous ignorance, but I can refuse to perpetuate it. I want you to know that I tell people the truth about you now. When your name comes up in business circles, which it does increasingly often, I don't pretend we were never married, but I also don't try to claim any credit for what you've built. I tell them you're brilliant, that you built ABN Studios with no help from anyone, that anyone who underestimates women in business clearly hasn't been paying attention to what you've accomplished. It's a small thing, probably meaningless to you, but it feels important to me to set the record straight wherever I can. I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the obvious things, the affair, the lies, the cruelty of calling you dead weight. I'm sorry for the subtle erosions too, for every time I talked about my dreams without asking about yours, for every time I assumed my ambitions were more important than yours, for every time I acted like supporting my success was your primary purpose instead of recognizing that you had your own purposes to pursue. I'm sorry for being married to an extraordinary woman and somehow convincing myself that I was the extraordinary one in the relationship. Most of all, I'm sorry for the time I wasted. Not just my time, but yours. 6 years when you could have been building openly instead of secretly. 6 years when you could have had a partner who celebrated your victories instead of one who didn't even notice them. 6 years when you deserved love that saw you, supported you, and helped you become even more than you could become alone. I can't give you those years back. I can't undo the damage of my blindness. I can't rebuild the trust I shattered or reclaim the respect I forfeited. But I can tell you this. Watching you thrive has been the most beautiful and heartbreaking education of my life. You are everything I said women couldn't be, everything I claimed was impossible, everything I was too limited to imagine. You are proof that the problem was never women's capabilities. The problem was men's willingness to see those capabilities. You are proof that love alone isn't enough if it comes without respect, support, and the basic curiosity to know who your partner really is. You are proof that the most dangerous thing you can do to an exceptional person is underestimate them, because they will eventually prove you wrong in ways that change everything. I hope your success brings you joy. I hope your platform continues to grow. I hope your message reaches every woman who needs to hear it. I hope your empire expands beyond anything you're dreaming of now. I hope you find love that sees you from the beginning, that celebrates your ambitions instead of tolerating them, that builds with you instead of around you. I hope you're happy, Abeni. Not just successful, though your success is undeniable. Happy, fulfilled, surrounded by people who recognize your worth without having to be taught to see it. I hope someday, when enough time has passed and enough healing has happened, we might be able to have a conversation. Not about us. There is no us anymore, and I understand that. But about business, about life, about the lessons we've both learned from our spectacular failure at being married to each other. I would like to be someone you could have a cordial conversation with someday. I would like to be someone who could hear about your latest achievement and feel genuine happiness for you, without the weight of regret crushing that happiness. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if I've earned even that small consideration, but it's what I hope for. Until then, I'll be here, watching your success from a distance, learning from your example, trying to become the kind of man who would have been worthy of the woman you always were. Thank you for everything you taught me, even when you didn't know you were teaching me. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like, what grace looks like, what building something meaningful looks like. Thank you for being extraordinary, even when I was too foolish to see it. With all the respect I should have shown you years ago, Musa. Abeni set the letter down on her desk and sat in the quiet of her office for a long time. Outside, Lagos was settling into its late-night rhythm, the sounds of traffic and life filtering through her windows like a distant soundtrack to the thoughts moving through her mind. The letter was everything she might have wanted to hear 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even 1 year ago. It was full of recognition, regret, and what seemed like genuine understanding of what he had lost and what she had gained. But reading it now felt like looking at a map of a country she no longer lived in. She pulled out her phone and opened a new message, typing slowly, carefully, choosing words that would close this chapter with the same grace that had defined her throughout their marriage's ending. Musa, she typed, I received your letter. Thank you for your honesty and for acknowledging what happened between us. I forgive you, not because you've earned it, but because I deserve peace. Your letter shows growth and understanding that I hope will serve you well in future relationships. I hope you find happiness and success in whatever comes next for you. But I need you to understand something. Forgiveness isn't reconciliation. Understanding isn't restoration. Your recognition of my worth now doesn't erase the years when that recognition was absent. I've built a life that works without your input, support, or approval. I've found my voice, my value, and my purpose. I've created something that brings me joy and allows me to help other women find their own strength. That life doesn't have space for looking backward. I wish you well. I hope you continue to grow. I hope you learn to see the extraordinary women who are undoubtedly in your life right now before they have to prove their worth by leaving. But my forgiveness is also my goodbye. Build something beautiful with the lessons you've learned. Just build it without me. Abeni. She sent the message and then, with deliberate finality, blocked his number. Some chapters end with dramatic confrontations. Others end with quiet closures. The best ones, Abeni had learned, end with walking away from what no longer serves you and toward what does. Tomorrow she would fly to Nairobi to address the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. Tomorrow she would speak to an audience of international business leaders about building empires in silence and letting success make the noise. Tomorrow she would continue building the life she had created from her own vision, her own work, her own refusal to accept other people's limitations as her truth. Tonight she had closed the door on the last connection to a version of herself who had waited for permission to be extraordinary. The empire she had built in silence was now making thunder heard around the world. And the sound was only getting louder. 6 months after Nairobi, the converted warehouse in Yaba buzzed with an energy that was part classroom, part therapy session, part revolution in progress. 24 women sat in a circle on colorful floor cushions, their ages ranging from 19 to 53, their stories as varied as their dreams, but united by a common thread. They had all been told, in ways both subtle and explicit, that their ambitions were too big for their circumstances. Abeni moved through the circle with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that the most powerful teaching happens not from a podium, but from the space between souls where truth lives. "Tell me about the voice," she said to Kemi, a 38-year-old teacher from Ibadan who had traveled 4 hours to attend the weekend workshop. "The voice that tells you your idea won't work. What does it sound like?" Kemi's hands twisted in her lap as she searched for words. "It sounds like my husband. Like my mother. Like every teacher who ever told me to be realistic about my expectations." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes it sounds like me." Murmurs of recognition rippled through the circle. These women knew that voice intimately, the internal critic that wore the faces of everyone who had ever dismissed their dreams as impractical, unrealistic, or simply too much. "And what is your dream?" Abeni asked gently. "I want to start a tutoring service for children with learning disabilities. My son has dyslexia, and I've learned so much about how to help him that I know I could help other families. But everyone says there's no market for it, that parents won't pay for extra help, that I should just focus on my regular teaching job." "What do you say to that voice when it speaks?" Kemi was quiet for a long moment. "I usually listen to it, and then I feel guilty for wanting more than what I have." "What if," Abeni said, settling onto a cushion across from her, "instead of arguing with that voice, you started building something so quietly that it couldn't interfere? What if you started with one family, one child, one success story that proved the voice wrong?" This was the heart of the ABN Foundation's Silent Queens program, not just teaching women to dream bigger, but teaching them to build strategically, quietly, incrementally, until their success became undeniable. The program had evolved from a simple idea. If Abeni could build an empire in the spaces between other people's attention, so could other women. But they needed more than inspiration. They needed practical tools, financial literacy, business strategy, and most importantly, a community of women who understood what it meant to be underestimated. "Auntie Abeni," said Blessing, a 23-year-old from Enugu who wanted to start a catering business. "But what if we don't have capital? What if we don't have connections? What if we don't even know where to start?" "Tell me," Abeni replied, "what do you have?" "I don't understand." "You want to start a catering business. What do you have right now, today, that could be the beginning of that business?" Blessing thought for a moment. I can cook. Really well. My neighbors always ask me to make food for their events." "So you have skill and you have customers. What else?" "I have my mother's kitchen, and my cousin has a car she doesn't use during the day." "So you have skill, customers, a workspace, and transportation. That's not nothing, Blessing. That's everything you need to start." Abeni walked to the whiteboard that dominated one wall of the workshop space. Written across it in bold letters was the Foundation's core principle. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. "The greatest lie women are told about entrepreneurship," she continued, addressing the full circle, "is that you need permission, capital, connections, and perfect conditions to begin. The truth is, you need vision, persistence, and the willingness to start small and grow smart." She clicked to a presentation slide showing the ABN Studios timeline, from that first 3,000 Naira dress sale to the current 58 million Naira annual revenue. Every empire begins with a single sale, a single customer, a single moment when you stop asking what if and start asking what now. The workshop continued through the afternoon, moving from mindset work to practical business planning. Women broke into small groups to develop their ideas, create basic financial projections, and identify their first potential customers. But the real magic happened in the margins. During breaks when women exchanged phone numbers, during lunch when a graphic designer offered to create logos for 3 different startups, during quiet moments when someone who had felt alone in her ambitions suddenly found herself surrounded by women who understood. "This is what I missed most during my building years," Abeni told her assistant Temi as they watched the women work together. Community, support, the knowledge that other women were fighting the same battles and winning them. The Silent Queens program had become the most requested offering of the ABN Foundation. Word spread through social media, through churches, through informal networks of women who whispered to each other about a place where dreams were taken seriously and practical support was available. Each monthly cohort was fully booked within hours of registration opening. Women traveled from across Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya to attend. Some came with fully formed business plans. Others came with nothing but dissatisfaction, with lives that felt too small for their spirits. All left with something they hadn't arrived with: permission to be extraordinary. Auntie Abeni, called Grace, a 45-year-old widow from Lagos who wanted to start a home cleaning service. Can you tell us about the hardest part? About building ABN studios? Abeni considered the question carefully. These women deserved honesty, not inspiration porn. The hardest part wasn't the late nights or the financial stress or even the technical challenges of running a business, she said finally. The hardest part was continuing to believe in my vision when the person closest to me acted like that vision didn't exist. The circle was completely still, understanding the weight of what she was sharing. I was married to someone who loved me but didn't see me, who supported what he thought were my hobbies but never asked about my ambitions, who would have been happy for me to succeed as long as that success remained smaller than his own. "How did you keep going?" asked Fatima, a 29-year-old from Kano whose in-laws had been discouraging her plans to start a children's clothing line. "I learned to carry my own validation. I learned to measure my progress by my own standards, not by other people's recognition. I learned that the opinion that matters most about your dreams is your own." She moved back to the whiteboard and wrote, "You are the CEO of your own life. Stop accepting applications for positions that aren't open." "But Auntie," said Blessing, her young voice carrying the weight of generations of women who had been taught to seek approval before acting, "what if they're right? What if we fail? What if we're not as capable as we think we are?" Abeni's smile was gentle but fierce. "What if you succeed? What if you're more capable than anyone, including yourself, has ever imagined? What if the only thing standing between you and extraordinary success is your willingness to start?" She gestured to the walls around them, which were covered with photos and success stories from previous cohorts. Women who had started with single customer service businesses and grown them into multi-employee operations. Women who had transformed hobbies into six-figure enterprises. Women who had built exactly what they'd been told was impossible. Every woman on these walls was once sitting where you're sitting, wondering if she was brave enough to try. The difference between them and the women who are still wondering isn't talent or luck or capital. It's the decision to start anyway. As the day wound down, participants began preparing for the program's signature ritual, the commitment ceremony. Each woman would stand before the group and make a public declaration about what she was going to build, when she was going to start, and how she was going to measure her progress. But first, Abeni shared something she had never spoken about publicly before. "Before you make your commitments," she said, her voice carrying the weight of vulnerability, "I want to tell you about the night I almost quit." The room went silent with the kind of attention reserved for sacred revelations. It was 18 months into building ABN Studios. I had been working 16-hour days, my bank job, then sewing until dawn, then trying to manage orders and customer service and production problems on my lunch breaks. I was exhausted, stressed, and starting to wonder if everyone was right about my dreams being impractical. She paused, remembering the weight of that particular darkness. That night, I had 3 orders to complete, my sewing machine was acting up, and I had gotten word that a potential wholesale client had decided to go with a different designer. I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by fabric and half-finished pieces, and I wanted to quit. "What stopped you?" asked Kemi softly. I looked at my phone and saw a message from a customer, a young woman who had bought one of my dresses for her first job interview. She sent a photo of herself wearing it with the caption, "I got the job. This dress made me feel like I could conquer the world." Abeni's voice strengthened as she continued, "In that moment, I realized I wasn't just building a business. I was building confidence, creating tools that helped women feel powerful, contributing to a world where more women could show up as their best selves. That was bigger than my tiredness, bigger than my frustrations, bigger than my fears." She looked around the circle at faces that reflected every emotion from tears to determination to quiet fire. So when you make your commitments today, remember, you're not just building businesses. You're building proof that women can do anything they set their minds to. You're creating examples that will inspire other women to try. You're contributing to a world where little girls grow up believing their dreams are valid and achievable. The commitment ceremony that followed was unlike anything the warehouse had ever witnessed. One by one, women stood and declared their intentions with voices that grew stronger with each statement. I am Kemi Adebayo, and I commit to starting my learning disability tutoring service by contacting 5 families this week. I am Blessing Okoro, and I commit to registering my catering business and booking my first official event within 30 days. I am Grace Okonkwo, and I commit to creating a business plan for my cleaning service and approaching my first potential client tomorrow. Each declaration was met with applause, encouragement, and the fierce support of women who understood exactly what courage it took to speak dreams aloud. When the last commitment had been made, Abeni stood before the group one final time. You are now members of an invisible network of women who refuse to accept limitations as permanent conditions. You carry with you not just business plans and contact lists, but the knowledge that you are not alone in your ambitions. She gestured to a banner hanging above them that had become the unofficial motto of the Silent Queens program. We teach women to thread needles and sew back their lives. Go build empires, she said simply. Build them quietly if you must, boldly if you can, but build them nonetheless. The world is waiting for what you have to offer. As the women gathered their materials and prepared to return to their regular lives, now armed with plans, support systems, and renewed belief in their own capabilities, Abeni reflected on how far this program had traveled from its original conception. What had started as a way to give back had become a movement that was redefining how women approached entrepreneurship across Africa. Universities were studying their curriculum. Government agencies were requesting partnerships. International development organizations were asking to replicate their model in other countries. But the numbers that mattered most to Abeni weren't the ones that impressed investors or captured headlines. They were the personal statistics. 847 women had completed the program over 2 years. 623 had started businesses within 6 months of graduation. 312 were generating enough income to support themselves and their families. 89 had hired employees of their own. Each number represented a life changed, a dream realized, a woman who had stopped waiting for permission to be extraordinary. As Temi locked up the workshop space and they prepared to leave, she turned to Abeni with a question that had been forming throughout the day. Auntie, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had access to something like this when you were starting ABN Studios? Abeni considered the question as they walked through the now quiet warehouse, past the inspiration walls and business planning stations that had witnessed so many transformations. I think, she said finally, that everything happened exactly as it needed to. Building alone taught me lessons about resilience and self-reliance that I needed to learn. But now that I have these resources, it feels right to share them with women who don't have to build as alone as I did. Outside, Lagos was transitioning from day to evening, the sky painted in colors that reminded Abeni of the fabrics she used to dream about in her early designs. Somewhere in the city, 24 women were returning to their lives with new plans and renewed determination. Somewhere else, other women were probably sitting in quiet moments, wondering if their dreams were worth pursuing. Tomorrow, some of those wondering women would find the ABN Foundation website. They would read success stories, watch testimonial videos, and maybe, just maybe, decide to apply for the next Silent Queens cohort. The revolution that had started with one woman refusing to accept her own erasure was becoming a movement of women who refused to erase themselves. And the sound of their collective success was becoming impossible to ignore. 1 year later, United Nations headquarters, New York. The General Assembly Hall had hosted presidents and prime ministers, Nobel laureates, and world-changing visionaries. But as Abeni walked to the podium, adjusting the microphone that would carry her voice to delegates from 193 countries, she carried with her something that felt more powerful than political authority or academic credentials. She carried the voices of every woman who had ever been told her dreams were too small to matter. The invitation to address the UN's Commission on the Status of Women had come 6 months earlier, part of their focus on women's economic empowerment in the digital age. The organizers had specifically requested her participation after the Silent Queens program was featured in a Harvard Business School case study on scalable models for women's entrepreneurship in emerging markets. But for Abeni, this moment felt less like recognition from international institutions and more like a conversation with her younger self, the woman who had once sat in a small apartment in Lagos, wondering if anyone would ever value what she had to offer. Distinguished delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber where decisions that shaped the world were made. 3 years ago, I sat in a divorce court in Lagos, listening to my husband sign papers that he believed would free him from dead weight. The assembly was completely still, drawn into the intimate beginning of what they had expected to be a policy address. Today, that dead weight employs over 200 people across 6 countries. That dead weight generates annual revenues exceeding 200 million naira. That dead weight has been featured in museums, magazines, and business schools as an example of innovation in contemporary African design. She paused, allowing the irony to settle in the minds of world leaders who understood the power of narrative transformation. But I'm not here to talk about my business success. I'm here to talk about what happens when we stop teaching women to make themselves smaller and start teaching them to build empires. Behind her, a massive screen displayed a world map dotted with pins, each one representing a Silent Queens program graduate who had started a business in the past 2 years. The pins stretched across Africa, with growing clusters in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe, where the program had been adapted and replicated. The ABN Foundation's Silent Queens program has now worked with over 3,000 women across 27 countries. But these numbers tell only part of the story. The real story is in the transformation of how women see themselves and how communities see women's economic potential. She clicked to the next slide. A photo of Kemi from that first workshop, now standing in front of her own learning center in Ibadan, surrounded by children and their grateful parents. Kemi Adebayo was told that there was no market for specialized tutoring for children with learning disabilities. Today, her center serves over 200 families and has a 6-month waiting list. She employs 12 teachers and has licensed her curriculum to 3 other cities. Another click. Blessing, beaming beside a catering truck with Blessing's Kitchen painted on the side in bright colors. Blessing Okoro was told that catering was not a real business, just a hobby that would distract her from finding a husband. Today, she runs the most sought-after catering company in Enugu, has catered events for government officials and international organizations, and is planning to franchise her model to other Nigerian cities. Click. Grace, standing in an office, wearing a uniform with Grace's cleaning services embroidered on the chest, surrounded by a team of 20 women in matching uniforms. Grace Okonkwo was told that cleaning was not entrepreneurship, just domestic work. Today, she runs a commercial cleaning company that serves major corporations in Lagos, provides health insurance for all her employees, and has started a financial literacy program for domestic workers across the city. The delegates leaned forward, engaged not just by the individual success stories, but by the pattern they revealed. Women transforming entire sectors by refusing to accept limitations as permanent conditions. These women didn't succeed because they received large grants or had powerful connections. They succeeded because someone told them a truth that changed everything. You already have what you need to begin. Abeni moved away from the podium, her voice growing more passionate as she spoke directly to the assembly. For too long, conversations about women's economic empowerment have focused on what women lack: capital, connections, confidence, technical skills. But what if we shifted that conversation? What if we started talking about what women already possess? She gestured to the screen where statistics replaced the individual photos. Women make 80% of household purchasing decisions globally. Women reinvest 90% of their earnings back into their families and communities. Women-owned businesses are 63% more likely to be profitable than male-owned businesses of similar size. The problem has never been women's capabilities. The problem has been systems that teach women to doubt those capabilities and wait for permission to use them. The energy in the room shifted as delegates recognized the challenge embedded in her words, that institutions, governments, and societies bore responsibility for creating environments where women's potential could flourish rather than be suppressed. The Silent Queen's model works because it starts from a position of abundance, not scarcity. We don't tell women what they can't do. We help them discover what they can do with what they already have. We don't give them permission to dream. We give them tools to turn those dreams into reality. She returned to the podium for her final points, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived every word she was speaking. Distinguished delegates, I challenge you to return to your countries and ask a different question. Not, how can we help women overcome their limitations? But how can we remove the barriers that prevent women from using their existing strengths? The screen behind her showed the final slide. A photo taken just 2 weeks earlier at the latest Silent Queen's graduation ceremony in Lagos. 50 women from across West Africa, holding certificates and business plans, their faces radiant with the confidence of people who had stopped waiting for permission to be extraordinary. Create policies that recognize women's unpaid work as valuable economic contribution. Fund programs that build on women's existing skills rather than trying to retrofit them for male-dominated industries. Support business models that allow women to start small and grow smart rather than requiring large initial investments. She gripped the podium, delivering her final words with the force of conviction earned through lived experience. Stop treating women's economic empowerment as charity and start treating it as economic necessity. When women thrive, families thrive. When families thrive, communities thrive. When communities thrive, nations thrive. The applause began before she finished speaking, building to a sustained standing ovation that seemed to shake the foundations of the building. But what moved Abeni most was not the official recognition. It was the flood of messages already appearing on her phone from women around the world who had watched the live stream. Watching from Kenya, starting my business tomorrow because of your words. In Ghana, feeling inspired to expand my little soap-making operation into something bigger. From Brooklyn, where I've been afraid to launch my consulting firm. No more waiting for permission. In Mumbai, where your story reminds me that invisible doesn't mean incapable. As she left the podium and walked through corridors where global leaders made decisions that affected billions of lives, Abeni reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a woman whose existence had been so thoroughly dismissed that she could be explained away as a sick cousin, to someone whose voice was now helping to shape international policy on women's economic empowerment. The transformation seemed impossible, but that was precisely the point. The most powerful changes often begin with someone deciding that impossible is just another word for untested. Her phone buzzed with a call from Temi back in Lagos. Auntie, the UN speech is already trending globally. Hashtag Build in Silence has been used over 2 million times in the past hour. And, she paused, excitement building in her voice, we've received funding requests from organizations in 12 countries who want to implement the Silent Queen's model. 12 countries, thousands of women who would learn that their dreams were valid, their capabilities were real, and their potential was limitless. That evening, at a reception hosted by the Nigerian delegation, Abeni found herself in conversation with Dr. Amina Mohammed, the UN Deputy Secretary General, who had specifically requested to meet her. Your speech today was extraordinary, Doctor. Mohammed said, but what strikes me most is how you've managed to scale intimacy. The Silent Queen's program creates deep personal transformation, but you've found ways to replicate that transformation across cultures and contexts. That's genius-level systems thinking. Thank you, Abeni replied, but the real genius belongs to the women who take the tools we provide and build things we never imagined. We just create space for their excellence to emerge. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, Doctor. Mohammed continued. The UN is launching a new initiative on women's economic resilience, focusing on post-pandemic recovery. We're looking for innovative models that can be implemented quickly and effectively across different economic contexts. Would you consider partnering with us to adapt the Silent Queen's program for refugee women? women in conflict zones, women in post-disaster recovery. The scope of what she was proposing took Abeni's breath away. Refugee camps, war zones, disaster areas, places where women had lost everything but still carried dreams that deserved nurturing. Women in crisis situations often have the strongest entrepreneurial instincts, Abeni said thoughtfully. They've learned to create something from nothing out of necessity. They just need frameworks to channel that survival intelligence into sustainable businesses. Exactly. And your model's emphasis on starting with existing resources makes it particularly relevant for contexts where traditional startup capital isn't available. As they discussed possibilities, mobile programs that could be deployed to refugee camps, virtual workshops for women in conflict zones, partnerships with local organizations worldwide, Abeni felt the familiar excitement of a vision expanding beyond what she had dared to imagine. Later that night, alone in her hotel room overlooking Central Park, Abeni opened her laptop and began writing in the journal she had kept throughout her entrepreneurial journey. 3 years ago, I was a woman who had learned to make herself so small that I became invisible even to myself. I measured my worth by other people's recognition and my success by other people's standards. Tonight, I'm a woman who has learned that the most dangerous thing you can do to a capable person is underestimate them, because they will prove you wrong in ways that change the world. But the greatest transformation isn't in my business metrics or speaking opportunities or international recognition. It's in understanding that I never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. I just needed to stop asking for it. She looked out at the city lights of New York, each one representing someone's dreams, struggles, ambitions, potential. Somewhere in those lights were women who felt invisible, who had been told their dreams were impractical, who were waiting for permission to start building the lives they wanted. Tomorrow, some of those women would discover the Silent Queens program. They would read success stories, watch testimonial videos, and maybe, just maybe, decide that they were ready to stop waiting. The revolution that had started with one woman refusing to accept her own erasure was becoming a global movement of women who refused to erase themselves. Abeni opened her laptop and began typing her next project proposal, the Silent Queens Global Initiative, scaling women's economic empowerment across crisis contexts. As she outlined programs for refugee women, disaster survivors, and women in post-conflict reconstruction, she thought about the girl she used to be. Sitting in a university library at 2 a.m., helping a frustrated engineering student with a broken photocopier, dreaming about building something beautiful and meaningful. That girl could never have imagined that her kindness would lead to love, that love would lead to marriage, that marriage would lead to erasure, that erasure would lead to rediscovery, that rediscovery would lead to empire building, and that empire building would lead to a global platform for women's empowerment. But perhaps that's how the most important journeys work, not through careful planning, but through the courage to keep building something beautiful, even when the blueprint keeps changing. I walked out with nothing but my name, she wrote in her journal as the night settled over New York and her plans took shape on the screen. That was enough to build an empire. Now that empire builds other empires, and those empires will build still others. Some voices change everything, but the most powerful voices are the ones that teach other voices to sing. She closed the laptop and looked out at the city one more time, imagining all the silent queens out there, ready to build, ready to rise, ready to prove that extraordinary was never about permission. It was always about decision. And tomorrow, thousands of women around the world would decide that they were ready to build something impossible. The woman who had once needed everything from others had become the woman who needed nothing from anyone. And that freedom had given her the power to give everything to everyone who needed to remember that they were enough. Just as they were, right where they were, with exactly what they had, ready to build empires. The end, in memory of every woman who was told she couldn't, and built it anyway. In honor of every voice that rose from whispers to thunder, in celebration of every silent queen who learned that extraordinary needs no permission.